Have you ever wondered if some things are just born bad? People say that good and evil are simple ideas, just products of our environment. But I've seen enough to know that sometimes a creature is born with darkness in its soul. About 10 years ago, our family had a German shepherd named Duchess. She had a litter of 7 puppies. 6 of them looked like any other shepherd you might see. But the 7th was different. She was snowy white. Not a true albino, just white with a black nose and bright blue eyes. There was no doubt about which one was unusual, so we named her Princess. Before the puppies were even 6 months old, our plans to give away or sell the others became pointless. One by one, they started dying. About 1 a month. They weren't injured or mangled. They just lay dead, as if they had simply fallen asleep. At first, we thought maybe their mother, in her very first litter, had accidentally crushed or smothered them. But soon we knew there was something else at work. Within a year, Princess began to dominate everyone. She even started to control her own parents. When we put food out for them, her parents would shrink back while she ate without challenge. One day, I tried to shoo her away so the other 2 could eat, and she snarled at me with perfect white fangs and a growl so deep it rattled in my gut. I started to wonder if the parents of serial killers ever realize they're raising a monster. Sure, some kids come from troubled homes with plenty of abuse, but sometimes the darkness is there from the very start. We tried to explain away the odd behavior of Princess, but nothing could hide the truth. She began doing bizarre things like killing rabbits and leaving them hanging in the bushes behind our house. My father would say some dogs do that to show they care, like bringing you food. But to me, it felt like a taunt, a reminder of the other puppies that had died. None of the rabbits had any marks or signs of struggle. Princess, just like her parents, was well cared for and never went hungry. In fact, the only time I ever saw her actually eat was when she killed and devoured a small kitten. We had some stray cats around our house, and one mother had a litter in our tool shed. One day after school, I went around to check on them. The shed door was open, and inside I found Princess with her jaws stained pink from her feast as she finished the kitten. Her blue eyes met mine, and I could feel a chill run through me. That same year, the turning point came when we found her sire dead in the backyard. He was the best dog we had ever known. We woke one Saturday morning to find him lying dead without a single mark, just like the rabbits. I can count the times I saw my father cry that day. It was also the day we learned how cleanly Princess killed. She strangled her prey, as if she were a jaguar, leaving the fur on his neck still wet with saliva. We spent the morning burying our faithful dog. Without a word, my father sent my mom and me away on some pretext, leaving us to wonder what he intended to do. I know some of you find the idea of putting an animal down to be terrible, but what other options did he have? Later that afternoon, we stayed at my uncle's house. I even overheard my mom telling my uncle that sometimes she wondered if Princess was possessed. And I had wondered the same thing. Not long before sunset that evening, we got a call from my dad. By the time we got home, he had already washed up and changed, but his wounds were hard to miss. Both his arms and one leg were bandaged, and his eyes looked haunted. Even after all these years, I can still remember how terrified he looked. A look I only later recognized as the face of someone who has stared death right in the eye. My father never talked much about that night, but I learned from a friend of his what really happened. Princess was many things, bloodthirsty and evil, but she wasn't stupid. In that sense, she took after her father, Rocky, who was famous for sneaking into the house during storms. Rocky could climb through the sliding glass door onto the patio and always closed it behind him. Princess was clever enough to sense something was wrong and would vanish into the woods. My dad, unwilling to wait any longer and filled with revenge, called a friend from down the road to help him hunt Princess. He later told us that she was lying in ambush, waiting for us. If it sounds absurd, I suppose I never did a good job explaining just how wrong she was. They chased her through the woods, and I later heard that she even lay under an overhang by the creek. As soon as my father stepped into the water, she grabbed his leg, causing him to fall headfirst into the creek, and then she lunged for his throat. By then, my dad had already lost his rifle. He grabbed her with both hands and fought with every ounce of strength he had, wrestling with a 115-pound bundle of teeth, claws, and muscle in the shallow water. I remember the struggle vividly. Princess tore at his arms while he managed somehow to kick her away, giving his friend the chance to take a clean shot. The friend fired 2 shots, one through her chest and another through her head. My dad was helped back home and taken to the emergency room. When I later got home, all he said was that Princess could rot. After they returned from the hospital, our neighbor came by on his ATV to pick up Princess for burial. He was a dog lover like us, and it didn't feel right to leave her body behind. He said there was no blood trail or any sign of a struggle. But after he'd been there for a few minutes, he noticed something else strange. There were no birds at all. The woods were dead quiet, like the calm before a terrible storm. He wisely left, saying that a storm was coming. That night, Duchess, our original family dog, came pawing at the back door, wanting to come inside. It was something she had never done before, even though she had always been with us. Later that night, I had a dream. In my dream, I was playing football in the backyard with some friends. I ran over to where a bad throw had landed near Rocky's grave, and as I reached for the ball, I felt Princess's head burst up from the ground to grab my hand. I woke up with a jolt, scared that I would carry that fear for another 10 years. When I finally woke up, Duchess was in the hallway, whining and nervously wagging her tail as she looked back toward the front of the house. I walked over to her, patted her head, and softly asked, "What is it, girl?" That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of claws scraping on glass. Something was pawing at the patio door. Terrified, I grabbed Duchess by the collar and dragged her with me to my parents' room, the one with the guns, for safety. I was only 14, and even though I was terrified, I knew that room was our safest place. I woke my parents and told them what I had heard. My dad got up, locked the bedroom door, and told us to lock ourselves in the bathroom. I heard the patio doors slide open, and if any of us doubted what had just come into the house, Duchess certainly did not. The only thing she had ever truly feared was her own pup. A deep growl trembled under our bare feet, and I felt my own fear rising. What followed was 6 hours of pure terror. We heard snarling at the bedroom door, crashes through the rest of the house, and as if it wasn't enough, Princess, despite everything, seemed to cause more chaos. My mother whispered prayers and my father cursed under his breath. At one point, my dad tried to leave the room, but he was forced to stay in as the situation worsened. We had no phone. The one on my parents' nightstand was dead. And later we discovered the phone line had been ripped out at the main box. My mom even suggested that we try to get to the car. But my father, who was usually the rational one, responded in a way that only made me more scared. As the night went on and the windows turned from black to gray, my mom and I kept watching the patio door, trying to see any sign of what might be out there. All we could see was darkness, perfect for a dog to slip in or out, especially one as large as Princess. After about an hour, my dad quietly opened the bedroom door. I remember thinking that any attempt at stealth was useless. Dogs have senses far keener than ours. My dad ordered us to stay put until he said otherwise, and I could hear him moving around, dropping things into a garbage bag. After about 30 minutes, he finally told us it was safe. When we stepped out, we were met with a terrible scene. Cushions and pillows were torn up, furniture was destroyed, and papers and books lay scattered on the floor. Worst of all, there were smears of blood everywhere. My mother asked what had happened, but my father simply turned and left to bury Rocky for the second time that day. We cleaned up as best we could while he drove to our neighbor's house to make the necessary calls. Even now, I still wonder what part of a homeowner's insurance policy covers an attack by an undead demon ghost dog. We never spoke much about that night afterward. Though the terror never repeated itself exactly, Duchess never left the house again. Time went on, and every so often we'd find a new present on the rabbit bush. A silent reminder of Princess's strange, lingering presence. About 2 years later, when I was in college, my dad called to tell me that our neighbor had passed away in his sleep from a heart attack. The coroner said it was a heart attack, but my dad and I both thought there wasn't even a mark on him. I often wonder what the last thing was that passed before that old bachelor's eyes. It seemed to stare right back at him. I've seen how it feeds on our fear. Not long after that, my parents put the house up for sale. I acted as the go-between on the deal. About a week after the new owners moved in, I got a call from the man of the house. He asked if we'd left any pets behind when we moved. Already dreading the answer, I said yes. He replied, "Oh, me and the kids keep seeing this white shepherd in the woods.